The problem isn't that you haven't built the right habits around friendship. The problem is that the habits most people try to build are aimed at the wrong layer entirely, and no amount of effort at the wrong layer produces the result you're after. That's not a motivational reframe. That's a mechanical explanation for why the things you've tried haven't moved anything, even when you actually tried them. The texting first, the showing up to things, the telling yourself this week would be different. Not because you lacked the intention, because the habits were built on a floor that wasn't there yet. This video is about what that floor actually is, and 3 specific habits that build it. Not habits that require you to be more social than you currently feel capable of being. Habits that work at the layer underneath that, the layer where the actual problem lives. By the end of this, you'll have 3 things you can actually do today. Not 3 things you should do. 3 things sized to where you actually are right now. So let's start with why the habits you've probably already tried don't stick. Here is what the standard friendship advice assumes. It assumes that the gap between you and real connection is primarily a behavioral gap. That if you just do more of the right things, reach out more, go to events, be more consistent, the friendship will follow. And so the habits it offers are behavioral habits. Text first. Show up. Be present. Repeat. The problem is that for someone who has spent years in primarily digital social life, someone dealing with the specific atrophy that comes from years of mediated, edited, curated interaction, those behavioral habits have a prerequisite. They require a baseline level of social confidence that the atrophy has quietly lowered below the threshold needed to execute them. It's not that you don't know how to text first. It's that by the time the moment arrives, something stops you. Something that doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like a wall. And then the moment passes and you're back to knowing what you should have done. This is what makes the execution gap so exhausting. It's not an information gap. You have the information. It's a readiness gap. And readiness is not built by pushing harder at the behavioral layer. It's built one layer down. Research on habit formation consistently shows that the habits most likely to collapse are the ones that begin by demanding more energy than the person currently has available. Connection habits fail at this rate in particular because social fear is a real cost, and the standard advice doesn't account for the cost before asking you to pay it. The 3 habits in this video don't ask you to pay a cost you don't have yet. They build the account first. That's the difference. That's what the wrong layer means. Now let's get into the 3 habits themselves. The first habit sounds almost too small to matter, and that is exactly why it works. Once a day, not more, you notice one person in your existing life who you have ambient positive feeling toward, a coworker you actually enjoy, a neighbor you've spoken to twice, someone from an old context who surfaces in your memory. You don't do anything with that noticing, you just notice. Here's what that does. Years of primarily digital social life trains attention away from the physical social environment. When everything meaningful happens on a screen, the offline world stops registering as socially relevant. You walk past the same people. You share space with the same colleagues. And the potential for connection that's sitting right there becomes invisible, not because it isn't there, but because the attentional muscle that registers it has gone quiet. Noticing without acting is attention retraining. It doesn't ask you to do anything that requires courage. It asks you to see what's already there. And that seeing, that small daily act of registering the human landscape around you, is the first thing that has to happen before anything else can. You're not building a friendship yet. You're rebuilding the capacity to notice that friendship is possible. The second habit has a single rule. 1 message per day to anyone that asks nothing back. Not a long message, not a vulnerable one, not one that requires a response to feel worthwhile. Something small. A voice note saying you thought of them when you heard a song. A link to something that reminded you of a conversation you had once. A reply to something they posted 3 days ago that you actually meant to reply to. The reason most people's social maintenance collapses isn't that they don't care. It's that every message carries invisible weight. The fear that it's too much. The fear that it's been too long. The fear that reaching out signals something, neediness or desperation, or the fact that you've been thinking about them more than they've been thinking about you. 1 low-stakes signal per day removes the weight. It sets a ceiling on what any single message has to accomplish. It's not a bid for closeness. It's not a test of whether they still like you. It's maintenance. the ordinary, undramatic act of staying present in someone's peripheral awareness. And the research on adult friendship is specific here. The friendships that survive distance, time, and the structural forces that pull people apart are almost never the ones that relied on big moments of reconnection. They're the ones that had a low-grade, consistent signal keeping the line warm. One message. No expectation attached. Every day, that's the whole habit. The third habit is the one that builds depth. And it operates inside conversations you're already having. The rule is simple. Once a day, in any conversation that's already happening, a work call, a check-in with family, a run-in with someone in your building, you allow it to go one question deeper than it would naturally go. Not two questions deeper. Not a vulnerability disclosure. One question. How are you actually doing with that? What's the part of it that's been hardest? I've been thinking about what you said last time. How did that turn out? One question deeper is the specific distance between a surface-level exchange and a conversation that leaves both people feeling slightly more real to each other. It's a small distance, but almost no one crosses it by default. Because by default, conversation stops at the point where both people feel safe. And safe is the territory where nothing grows. What the 5-minute conversation rule does is build the habit of crossing that distance in low-stakes settings with people you're already in contact with, without requiring you to engineer a deep conversation from scratch. You're not building intimacy in a single exchange. You're practicing the movement. And the movement, that one question deepening, becomes available to you in higher stakes moments later because you've made it ordinary. These 3 habits do not promise friendship. They promise something more honest than that. They shift the probability. They build the floor. Not your fault that the floor wasn't there. Not your fault that the atrophy happened. But the floor is something you can build, and these are how. If you want these 3 habits to actually become habits, not just ideas you tried for a week, there's a 21-day practice in the description built exactly for this. 21 days of small daily actions, starting where you actually are, with each day building on the last. Not information. Structure. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. Now let me tell you what changes when these habits take hold, because this is the part most habit advice skips. It gives you the habits and stops there. It doesn't tell you what changes in the environment around you when the habits are running. And that change is what makes the behavioral layer finally navigable. When you've been noticing for 2 weeks, really noticing the people in your peripheral world, something shifts. The social landscape stops being a wall and starts being a terrain. You begin to see the texture of it. Who seems open? Who's been orbiting near you, where the natural openings already exist? You stop arriving at social situations blind and start arriving with data your own attention has gathered. That's not a small shift. For someone who has felt socially invisible, not just to others but to themselves, that orientation is the thing that makes the next step feel possible rather than impossible. When you've been sending one low-stakes signal a day for 2 weeks, something else changes. The weight lifts off the individual message. The act of reaching out becomes ordinary, not loaded. And when it's ordinary, you start doing it without the pre-reaching deliberation that currently costs more energy than the reaching itself. And when you've been going one question deeper in existing conversations, the conversations you're already in, with the people already around you, the depth starts to feel less like a risk and more like a register. A level of conversation you can access. Not guaranteed, not always available, but accessible. You know how to get there. And knowing how to get there is different from hoping it might happen someday. That's what changes. Not the external circumstances at first. The internal environment, the ground. And here is the thing about that ground that no one says directly. It does not require courage to prepare it. The 3 habits in this video are not asking you to be braver than you are right now. They are asking you to be consistent in a way that costs less than courage but builds toward it. The courage becomes available later. Not because you forced it, because the ground produced it. This is what the advice that has failed you was missing. It asked for the flower before the soil existed. These habits are the soil. If you want the structure to make these habits stick, the 21-day practice in the description is where to go next. It's built for exactly this, the gap between understanding and doing, closed one day at a time. Link in the description and pinned comment. Which of these 3 habits is the one you'd start with? And what's the thing that would most likely stop you from actually doing it? There's a version of this problem that feels enormous. The years of atrophy, the failed attempts, the gap between who you were before all of this and who you've become inside it. And it is not small. But the path back doesn't have to start enormous. It starts with noticing the person you already have ambient warmth toward, and letting that noticing be enough for today. It starts with one message that asks nothing back. It starts with one question deeper, in a conversation that was already happening, just to practice the movement. Not because those things are friendship. They're not friendship yet. They're what makes friendship more likely. And more likely, compounded across days, becomes real. The thing that's been missing isn't courage, necessarily. It isn't information. You've had enough of that. What's been missing is a place to start that doesn't cost more than you currently have. This is that place. There is one person who surfaced in your mind during this video. You already know who it is. You don't need to do anything big. You don't need the confidence you don't have yet. You just need to send the ordinary message. Not the impressive one, not the vulnerable one. The ordinary one. That's the whole thing. That's the habit. That's where the ground starts.